Pointer sisters. And, of course, the most famous ones of all, the Beverly sisters. Oh,
Bottom, never mind the Buzzcocks with Menly B and Red Dwarf. The Comedy Zone just about to kick into action on BBC Two in a moment.
That's life. That's what people say.
Many simple things in life can turn out to be a problem. The internet needn't be one of them. If you call 0800 100 900 now, you can find your nearest free BBC Webwise taster session and learn how to get started on the web.
On my showboat tonight, an Olympic dream team. 5 times gold medalist Steve Redgrave. In there with him, Sir Nigel Hawthorne, Jane Horrocks, Patrick Keelty and Heather Small. That's Parkinson, 9:30, BBC One.
The news at 9 o'clock first on BBC One with Nicholas Witchell.
Yugoslavia celebrates the downfall of a tyrant and the dawn of democracy. Hundreds of thousands gather in Belgrade to greet their new president. A beaten bully, but Milosevic is still in Serbia and keen to stay in politics. Another day of turmoil in the Middle East. 8 more Palestinians are dead. And take a good look, because it'll soon be gone. Historic Wembley faces the final whistle. Good evening. Slobodan Milosevic's face said it all. After 13 years, during which he's led his country to defeat after defeat in war, crippled its economy, but grown rich from corruption, today he faced the fact that it was all over. In case he had any final doubts, the Russian foreign minister came to call at his heavily guarded compound just outside Belgrade and told him so. At the same time, Yugoslavia's constitutional court was confirming that Václav Koštunica had won last week's election and is Yugoslavia's new president. One of his first actions was to release 2 British policemen held for 10 weeks by the Milosevic regime on spying charges. Our first report is from the BBC's World Affairs editor John Simpson, who is in Belgrade.
Belgrade, day 2 of the revolution. And the city is turned into a huge demonstration, with one just merging into the next. It's what they always tried to do in the past, but never quite managed. One or other opposition leader always seemed to fall out of line, and the whole thing collapsed. But that was the past, and the past was another country.
What we're witnessing here is the birth of a new country, a Serbia that wants to be open to the outside world instead of treated like some international pariah, and a Serbia which wants to be free in economic terms as well, free of all the manipulation and corruption which always seem to come when the state runs everything.
This afternoon, we caught our first tantalizing glimpse of Slobodan Milosevic in defeat, welcoming the Russian Foreign Minister, Mr. Ivanov, to the Belgrade villa, where he's apparently spent the entire crisis. He didn't, after all, fly abroad or go to eastern Serbia. You could see the strain in his face, but he doesn't quite seem to understand what's happened to him. He told Mr. Ivanov he wanted to play a role in political life here still. Unthinkable, of course. Though, as Vojislav Koštunica, the man who's taken his place, quietly and calmly explained his own position, it did begin to look as though no immediate action might be taken against Mr. Milosevic after all. That could stir up the army and the police too much and make them nervous about reprisals. Still, there are reminders everywhere of what Mr. Milosevic did, and the ground outside the Parliament building is littered with some of them. When the crowd took over the building yesterday, they found hundreds, perhaps thousands, of fraudulent ballot papers from the election 12 days ago, all carefully filled in by dutiful bureaucrats, and all, of course, in favour of Mr. Milosevic. It was a trick which has always worked in the past, but this time was once too often. Rigging the election was what brought him down. Already some injustices are being undone. The two British policemen who spent 67 days in jail wrongly accused of espionage, John Yore and Adrian Prangnell, were released today. They'd been on secondment in Kosovo.
I think probably going to the first bar that we can find, have a very large drink to celebrate what is a stupendously wonderful day for us. Thank you.
Liam Hall, one of the two Canadians arrested on similarly trumped-up charges, was freed too, and his colleague's release is expected soon. But yesterday's wasn't entirely another velvet revolution carried out in peace and love. There was a darker side to it. When the crowd torched the government's television station RTS, it was partly from revenge. During last year's NATO bombing campaign, the management ordered the staff to stay at their posts, even though it knew NATO was planning to bomb the station. 16 people died when it happened 18 months ago. Yesterday, the Director General of RTS was forced out of the building by the flames and savagely beaten. The crowd believed he had wanted his staff to die because it made good pro-Milosevic propaganda in the NATO campaign. His beating up was an ugly business which marred the whole record of the revolution. Otherwise, only one person actually died, and that was an accident. But what happened to the head of RTS shows the hatred there still is for the Milosevic system. But the vast majority of the demonstrators have been entirely peaceable. Their hope is that everything's going to be easier from now on, and their country will be respected in the world as it was before Slobodan Milosevic came to power. It'll probably take longer than they hope, but it will surely come. John Simpson, BBC News, Belgrade.
Well, estimates of just how many people took to the streets yesterday vary, but it could have been as many as 500,000. They came from all over Serbia for what was intended to be the climax of 8 days of industrial action. Instead, they brought down a president. Gavin Hewitt has been out on the streets of Belgrade hearing firsthand why they did it.
The day after a revolution, and the streets echo to the sounds of whistles and car horns. Students had been at the forefront of the attack on President Milosevic's symbols of power, and with victory assured, many seemed less concerned about whether he left the country or not.
Actually, for me, I don't care about him. I care about me, my family, and my future.
But some found it hard to believe their revolution was complete, while Mr. Milosevic was still somewhere in the country receiving guests.
Not just great because nothing is over yet, because we don't know where is Milosevic.
This evening, many of the crowds who had been on the streets yesterday came to the St. Sava Church to pray for peace. These were not people driven by a revolutionary agenda. Time and again they told us they just wanted a normal life, to live in a country without shame and isolation.
I think that all is about a normal and a new life in our country.
Above all, people want an end to policies that saw 3 Balkan wars that made refugees across Croatia, Bosnia and Kosovo.
Tonight, the streets of Belgrade are crowded once again, people reveling in their newfound freedom. And the strongest impression is the absence of any desire for vengeance, either towards President Milosevic or his inner circle.
So, for the moment, there's no talk of bringing to justice those who brought ethnic cleansing to this part of Europe. It's not that kind of upheaval. It's not about addressing the stain of the past. This is more about a people just yearning to have basic freedoms for themselves. Gavin Hewitt, BBC News, Belgrade.
So, what do we know of the man newly installed as president? Václav Kostunica has held together Serbia's disparate opposition parties and taken power with little opposition. Western leaders have offered friendship and cooperation, but what will the 56-year-old lawyer do with his newfound power? As our world affairs correspondent David Shukman reports, the West could find that its overtures receive only a guarded welcome.
Vojislav Kostunica suddenly finds himself transformed from unknown professor of law to leader of one of the largest and most troubled countries in the Balkans. He embodies the spirit of revolution, but no one's asking too closely what that revolution will actually mean. Last night on television, he made what appears to be a simple and welcome statement. I have a vision, he said, of normal relations with other countries, but this won't be simple, Mr. Kostunica warned, because of the countries that sinned against us, that bombed us last year. Britain was one of those, of course, and today the Prime Minister was offering friendship.
Whatever our quarrel with the oppressive and odious regime of Milosevic, it was never a quarrel with Serbian people. And we want to make sure that as Serbia reaches for democracy, we are there giving them a helping hand.
The first help will be to repair the damage of the NATO bombing and of the long years of sanctions. On Monday, the EU plans to lift those sanctions and unlock a huge package of aid, but there may be strings attached. Here at the Foreign Office, they say the priority is now to help the Serb people, but it's not quite as simple as that, because Britain and other Western governments believe that if Serbia wants to be a member of the European family, it must behave like one. And that means two things. First, arresting Slobodan Milosevic, and second, not causing trouble with Serbia's neighbours. War crimes investigators were in Kosovo today, pressing the case for Mr. Milosevic to be handed over. The investigators know Serbia's new leader has refused to do this. It's the first source of tension.
I truly believe that this is the only solution if there is to be a true and lasting peace in the Balkans, and if the people of Yugoslavia are to enjoy a democratic existence.
That's what the outside world is hoping for as it watches this revolution in the Balkans. The focus will be on Montenegro and how Mr. Kostunica responds to its demands for independence, and on Kosovo, now under NATO control. Slobodan Milosevic had played the Serb nationalist card for over a decade, and many Serbs loved him for it. His successor is just as ardent, and even thought Mr. Milosevic was sometimes too soft.
No one's expecting Mr. Kostunica to be a pushover, to curl up and be friendly to the West. After all, he's been intensely critical of NATO's bombing raids over Kosovo, but he's going to be a man they can probably do business with.
Mr. Kostunica inherits a country traumatized by war and uneasy about receiving help from the countries that bombed it. He won the revolution and now has to handle the aftermath. David Shukman, BBC News.
Well, our World Affairs editor, John Simpson, joins us now live from Belgrade. John, let's consider first the future of Slobodan Milosevic, still in Serbia, as we've seen today. What do you think this new administration is going to do with him?
Well, I must say at first I thought they'd arrest him straight away. I now begin to wonder whether that is actually going to happen immediately. I think the difficulties of arresting him might be, at this moment at any rate, might be to create all sorts of trouble with the army and the police, frighten them with the thought that there were going to be witch hunts in which they might be involved. So I think it is possible that Mr. Kostunica will hang on with that, keep him under some kind of loose control, perhaps in this villa where he's been in Belgrade the whole time, and then see what he can do after that. What he won't do, I think, is extradite him to The Hague, no matter what happens, simply because it happens to be against the constitution of Yugoslavia, and he's a constitutional lawyer. He believes in following the letter of these things.
Mr. Milosevic said that he wanted to remain active in politics at one point today, but so long as he is